The first night Ezra Cole slept in the abandoned Granger Ranch, the wind came down from the high country like a judgment, slipping through the warped boards and rattling the loose tin on the roof as if the land itself were warning him he did not belong. And he lay on the narrow cot staring at the dark rafters, listening to the old house breathe, telling himself he had chosen this loneliness because it was quieter than regret, because the plains farther east still carried the sound of gunfire, and a woman's last cry that visited him in dreams, and because a man with blood behind his eyes had no right to settle near other souls. Yet even as he reasoned with himself, there came a sound that did not fit the night, not coyote nor owl nor the creak of timber, but a low, threaded chorus that lifted and fell, the long mourning call of wolves, close enough that the hair on his arms rose, and he felt again that old tightening in his chest that had followed him since the war, a sense that fate was a thing with teeth. The ranch had been left to rot for 10 years after the Grangers vanished in a winter so hard it killed horses standing, and folks in the nearest town said the place was cursed, said lights moved in the trees and animals would not graze near the creek, but Ezra had bought it cheap with gold he did not care to keep. And he told himself curses were just stories men told to explain their fear of empty land, though as he rose before dawn to walk the property, rifle in hand, the mist lay thick along. The cottonwoods and the grass bent, as if something unseen had passed through it, and everywhere were tracks, not just the neat round prints of wolves, but smaller ones, bare, human, half-moon toes pressed into mud, leading from the creek toward the rocks. He followed them without thinking, because something in him had always followed what frightened him most, and as the sun climbed and burned the fog away, he found the den beneath a split boulder, the smell of fur and wildness heavy in the air. And there she was, crouched among gray bodies, her hair tangled like bramble, her skin marked with old scars and the dirt of years, eyes bright and watchful as a trapped doe. And she did not scream when she saw him, did not beg or threaten, but bared her teeth, in a soundless snarl that carried more warning than words, and a she-wolf rose beside her. Hackles lifted, amber eyes fixed on Ezra with a calm that spoke of killing done without hatred. He lowered the rifle, slowly, feeling foolish for having raised it at all. And in that moment, he understood this girl was not lost in the way townspeople meant it. She was not a child stolen by savagery. She was something grown to fit a different law. And the thought unsettled him more than any ghost tale. He backed away, hands open, heart hammering, and the wolves watched until he was gone, until the rocks and trees swallowed him back into the ranch that no longer felt empty, but claimed. Days passed in a strange truce, Ezra mending fence, hauling water, cooking beans in the evenings while the howls rose and fell like a tide, and sometimes he saw her at a distance, moving along the ridge with a grace that made his own body feel heavy and wrong, her feet silent, her gaze never lingering. And he told himself he would leave her be, that a man who had broken his promises once should not make new ones to the wild. Yet when he found a calf torn open near the south pasture, he knew the town would not care whose fault it was, and that men with rifles would come, and he felt the weight of an old choice pressing again on his chest. He set out before dusk with a strip of dried meat and a coil of rope. He did not intend to use, speaking aloud as he walked, though no one had taught him how to speak to the untamed, telling her he meant no harm, telling himself he was lying to both of them. And when she appeared at the edge of the trees, closer now, he saw she was younger than he had thought, no more than 17 winters, though age sat strangely on her, as if time had learned different manners with her, and when she spoke, the sound startled him, rough and broken, words shaped wrong in her mouth. "Go," she said, not cruel, just certain. And he answered with his name because names were the last thing he believed in, and she tasted it like a foreign food. "Isra," then said hers, "Lark," a sound like wings, and something old and tight in him loosened. He left the meat on a stone and walked away, feeling eyes on his back. And that night the howls did not come so close, as if a line had been drawn. The next morning smoke rose from the hills where no fire should be, and by noon the wind carried the smell of men, leather, and iron and tobacco. And Ezra knew the town had decided the ranch was trouble again, and trouble always drew the wrong kind of attention. And when he saw Lark standing near the creek, her head tilted as if listening to a sound only she could hear, he understood. She knew it too. And for the first time since he had laid down his gun years before, he lifted it with purpose, not to take a life, but to stand between two worlds that could not see each other. And as the first rider crested the rise and the wolves gathered silent in the trees, Lark's eyes met his, full of something like warning and something like trust. And Ezra felt the land hold its breath, waiting to see which law he would choose to serve. As the riders came on with the sun flashing on their rifle barrels and the dust of their horses lifting like a wound in the earth, Ezra Cole felt the past rise up inside him, not as fear, but as a familiar ache. The knowledge that every road he had ever walked led him to a moment where a man must decide who he was willing to become, and he stepped forward from the shadow of the cottonwoods, with his gun held low, not pointing yet, his voice steady as he called out that this was his land now, and there was nothing here worth blood, though he could see in their eyes they had already written a different ending. Men hardened by loss and rumor, convinced the wild owed them obedience. Lark did not run when the wolves shifted behind her, silent as smoke. And Ezra realized then she trusted him not because he had fed her or spoken kindly, but because he had stood still in her world without trying to own it. And that trust weighed heavier than any oath he had broken before. The lead rider laughed and said the ranch was cursed, said beasts and savages didn't have rights, and Ezra felt the old anger flicker, the same anger that had once made killing feel like order. But he swallowed it down, stepping closer, telling them the wolves had kept the land alive when men abandoned it, that no one was being harmed, that they should turn back. And for a breath, it seemed the wind might carry his words somewhere useful, until a nervous hand twitched and a shot cracked the air, splintering bark inches from Lark's head. The wolves exploded into motion, a gray blur and snapping teeth, horses screaming, men shouting, chaos ripping the quiet valley apart. And Ezra fired then, not at flesh but at the ground, at the air, driving men back with noise and force, his heart pounding with a terrible clarity, knowing once a line was crossed it could never be redrawn. One man fell, dragged from his saddle by a wolf. Another fled outright, and the rest scattered, fear finally outweighing pride, leaving the valley torn and bleeding and silent again, except for the whimper of a wounded rider crawling away and the low, grieving sound of a wolf struck in the flank. Ezra knelt beside the animal as Lark came to him, her hands sure and gentle, pressing cloth to the wound, and in that shared stillness he saw how thin the space was between survival and cruelty, how easily men chose the latter when they forgot they were guests on the land. The rider lived, and Ezra sent him away with a warning that carried more promise than threat. And word spread after that day that the Granger Ranch was not empty, not cursed but watched, and most men decided there were easier places to test their courage. Winter came early and hard, and Ezra stayed, repairing what he could, sharing meat and fire with a girl who learned words slowly and taught him silence in return. And though she never slept under the same roof, there were nights she sat by the door while wolves circled wide, and Ezra understood that love did not always mean closeness. Sometimes it meant choosing not to cage what you cared for. He told her of the war, of the woman he had failed, of the life he had run from, and she listened with eyes that judged nothing. And when spring thawed, the creek and the grass pushed green through old scars in the soil, Lark stood on the ridge one morning and told him, haltingly, that the wolves would move on, that it was the way of things, and Ezra felt loss cut through him sharper than any bullet. But he nodded, because he had learned that holding on was not the same as saving. On the day they left, the pack paused at the tree line, and Lark came to him, pressing her forehead briefly to his chest, a gesture more intimate than any embrace he had known. And then she was gone, swallowed by the wild she belonged to, leaving Ezra alone again on the ranch, but not hollow, not running. Years later, folks said the land changed, that grass grew thick and animals thrived, that a quiet man lived there who harmed no one and asked little, and sometimes, on storm-heavy nights, wolves could be heard on the ridges, not hunting, just calling, and Ezra would step out onto the porch and listen, feeling regret soften into something like peace, knowing some destinies were not meant to be possessed, only honored. If this story moved something in you, if you felt the pull of the wild and the weight of choice, then you're already part of these tales. Subscribe to the Western Tales and ride with us again into stories where fate, sacrifice, and untamed hearts still rule the frontier.